The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of the presidential palace in Ouagadougou, casting long shadows over the polished marble floors. President Ibrahim Traoré stood near the glass, arms folded behind his back, eyes scanning the courtyard below. The usual fragrance of jasmine drifted from the palace gardens, but to him it seemed faint and oddly synthetic. For weeks, a strange metallic taste clung to the back of his tongue, refusing to dissipate no matter how much mint tea he drank or how often he brushed his teeth. He had written it off as stress. His role demanded relentless vigilance. Burkina Faso had enemies, both within and beyond its borders. Still, something about the taste gnawed at him. It wasn't just metallic. It was clinical, almost chemical, like the smell of freshly sterilized surgical tools. Behind him, the door opened quietly. Colonel Zita entered, his boots clicking softly against the floor. In his hands, he carried a thick manila envelope. "The results from last week's blood panel," Zita said, voice low. Traoré took the envelope and opened it. The report was from a private lab in Germany, unaffiliated with the government or any of its known medical providers. He'd insisted Zita send the samples without anyone's knowledge, not even his personal physician, Dr. Khan. The numbers looked off. There were entries he didn't understand, chemical names unfamiliar even from his military training. But two were highlighted, underlined in red ink: methylfluorocarbamates, benzopyridyl toxins. Below that, the lab's note was brief but damning. These compounds are not naturally occurring and should not be present in any human subject. Levels indicate chronic, controlled exposure. Traoré didn't speak for a long moment. His mind moved in measured silence, assessing every possibility. His doctor, Dr. Khan, had administered regular vitamin injections for over a year. He had always been calm, reassuring, impeccably dressed, Swiss-trained, fluent in 5 languages, and now, possibly a killer. He didn't flinch. He didn't rage. Instead, he closed the folder and handed it back to Zita. "Say nothing," he murmured. "Not a word to anyone, especially not to Khan." Zita gave a short nod. He knew better than to ask questions. Orders were orders. 3 days later, the palace was quieter than usual. Rain tapped gently at the windows as the president's family sat down for dinner. The dining room was intimate, far from the echoing halls and state rooms. Aminata, his 12-year-old daughter, had spread her chemistry textbook across the polished mahogany table, pink highlighter in hand. "Papa," she said between bites of rice and grilled fish, "why do your vitamin shots smell like those preservatives we use in lab class?" He paused, fork suspended halfway to his mouth. "What do you mean?" "Sweetheart, yesterday," she said, flipping a page in her book, "when Dr. Khan was prepping your injection, I smelled something sharp, like formaldehyde. Kind of sweet, but not like candy. More like the stuff we keep the frog specimens in." His wife, Jamila, chuckled and reached to tuck a curl behind Aminata's ear. "You're becoming quite the little scientist." Traoré didn't laugh. 20 years of battlefield experience had taught him to listen, truly listen, especially to the details others dismissed. Children noticed things adults had trained themselves to ignore. That night, he made a decision. After his scheduled injection the next morning, he excused himself from the room early and entered his private quarters. Rather than discarding the syringe in the biohazard container, he carefully removed the remaining liquid and placed it into a sterile vial he had acquired through unofficial channels. He sealed it, wrapped it in plastic, and slid it into the hidden compartment of a diplomatic travel case. 2 days later, under the pretense of attending a trade conference in Rabat, he flew to Morocco with only 2 aides and no medical entourage. Upon arrival, he diverted to Casablanca and visited a private chemical lab known for its agricultural contaminant analysis. He approached the director directly, using his military credentials. "I need full-spectrum toxicology on this," he said. "Say it's for pesticide contamination in cattle feed. I'll pay triple your usual rate." The director didn't ask questions. The sample went into processing. 72 hours later, the call came through on a secure line routed through the Burkinabe embassy in Algiers. "Sir," the lab technician said, "your sample contains synthetic cardiotoxins, specifically slow-acting agents that degrade the heart muscle over time. They're military in design. We've only ever seen them in controlled defense experiments in Israel and Russia." Traoré sat in silence, the phone pressed to his ear. He felt the floor tilt, not from surprise but from confirmation. 14 months. That's how long Khan had been administering these called vitamin injections, and he had been getting weaker, fatigued, increasingly breathless after light exercise. All of it had been orchestrated. Back at the palace, Traoré began a quiet counteroffensive. He recruited a loyal military medic, one who had no previous connection to Dr. Khan, and instructed him to replace the vitamin serum with harmless Sullen. From that day forward, Traoré received his injections from Khan as usual, but the solution was prepared by someone else. Khan never knew. The president also resumed showing symptoms: fatigue, dizziness, chest tightness. It was an act, played to perfection. Simultaneously, he began a covert investigation into Dr. Khan's background. The Swiss medical degree listed on his CV couldn't be verified through informal diplomatic backchannels. His licensing board showed a gap of 4 years with no explanation. More alarmingly, Traoré discovered that 3 former African heads of state who had used Khan's services had died within 18 months of hiring him, each from sudden, unexplained cardiac arrests. Still, there wasn't enough to act. Then came the breakthrough, unexpected and chilling. During routine electrical maintenance in the palace's east wing, 2 technicians discovered an anomaly in the power feed of Khan's portable EKG machine. It was a tiny device no larger than a coin, embedded deep in the casing, hidden within the wiring itself. They brought it to the intelligence chief, Sadoga, who called an emergency midnight briefing. "Sir," he said, placing the dismantled machine on the conference table, "this isn't just hardware, it's a transmitter. It's been routing your real-time biometric data through 7 proxy servers before hitting a node in Tel Aviv." Traoré stared at the device. It was flawless: no signature, no broadcast identifiers, no manufacturer tags. Only someone with Mossad training could have embedded this without detection. Sadoga said, "Dr. Khan isn't a doctor who became a spy. He's a spy who learned just enough medicine to pass." It all fit: the toxins, the Swiss backstory, the targeted pattern of silent deaths. He hadn't just hired a corrupt doctor, he'd let an Israeli asset live in his palace for over a year. Now the war moved into its final phase. Over the next month, Traoré staged his own medical decline. He allowed his heart rate to be manipulated, stress-induced episodes, skipped meals, sudden late-night calls to fake clinics. All of it carefully documented. He leaked medical charts with doctored EKG data, knowing they'd be routed back to Tel Aviv. The Israelis would believe their operation was nearing success. Khan remained oblivious, recording vitals and prescribing mild beta blockers with a calm voice and polite smile. The trap was almost ready. The room was quiet except for the soft ticking of a vintage brass clock mounted on the far wall. President Amadou Traoré sat motionless at his desk, staring at the medical files spread before him. Each page told a tale that he couldn't reconcile with reality. Elevated blood pressure, episodes of chest pain, shortness of breath, electrocardiograms laced with anomalies. The diagnosis was clear: his heart was failing, and yet he felt fine. He had noticed the pattern months earlier. Odd fatigue after meetings, a sharp thump in his chest while climbing stairs, dizzy spells that passed as quickly as they arrived. But they were always observed, always in the presence of his physician, Dr. Conrad Messil, known as Degger Khan to close staff. The man had earned a reputation for brilliance, precision, and discretion. He'd been with Traoré for a year, always reassuring but increasingly insistent on caution. It hadn't raised suspicions until the intelligence report arrived. At exactly 4:01 p.m. the day prior, agents in the Office for Digital Sovereignty intercepted a burst of communication from an encrypted tablet, traced to Dr. Khan's quarters. The decoded message was brief but chilling: target showing expected deterioration. Authorization received for final phase. Optimal window February 15, 28. Method: induced cardiac arrest during routine consultation. The president read those lines again and again. They felt unreal, like lines from a screenplay. But there was no mistaking the intent. Someone had decided his time was up, and the method was cold, calculated, and nearly perfect. Not a bullet or a coup, but a faked heart attack during a medical exam. It would be declared natural, and the world would mourn, and the machine would keep turning. Only, he wasn't going to die in 18 days. He called in his security advisor at dawn. Captain Abe Bamba arrived at the palace in plainclothes, her expression neutral but alert. She listened silently as Traoré detailed the intercepted message and laid out his theory that the cardiac anomalies were synthetic, manufactured to mimic disease. Her hands folded, her brow tightened. "Do you have proof?" she asked. "I will," he said. But first, I need to make them believe they've succeeded. Over the next 48 hours, the president, Bamba, and a small inner circle executed a plan so elaborate and daring it bordered on the theatrical. Military special effects experts were brought in under the guise of a communications drill. Palace medical staff were quietly split into two groups, the trusted and the deceived. An ambulance was parked nearby, its sirens ready to wail at a moment's notice. Cameras were positioned discreetly to capture each stage of the deception. The stage was set. On the morning of February 12, 3 days before the planned, fatal consultation, the event unfolded. During a closed cabinet meeting, President Traoré clutched his chest and slumped forward. Aides screamed. Emergency personnel burst in within seconds. Cameras captured the controlled chaos, oxygen masks, CPR compressions, monitors flashing with flat lines. Within 15 minutes, state television was reporting that the president had suffered a massive heart attack. Video showed an ambulance tearing away from the palace gates. The public reeled. Within hours, carefully crafted leaks suggested Traoré was in critical condition at a secure hospital. Official updates were vague. The air in the capital turned heavy, anxious, electric with rumor. And in a guarded wing of the military hospital, the real President Traoré watched it all unfold on a silent monitor. Dr. Khan did exactly what they hoped. His communications lit up with activity. Signals were intercepted and decrypted. Messages to handlers in Tel Aviv, coded updates affirming the target's death, requests for immediate extraction. Surveillance footage showed him packing in haste. His movements were erratic, anxious, but confident. He believed the plan had worked. As he moved through the airport's VIP terminal under a false identity, agents closed in. When the doctor turned from the security checkpoint, he froze. A line of uniformed Burkina Faso security forces stood in formation at the exit. And from a matte, black SUV, a familiar figure emerged, strong posture, precise steps, eyes hard and unreadable. President Traoré. The doctor's knees buckled. His lips parted but no words came. Dr. Khan, the president said evenly, standing beneath the late afternoon sun that stretched long shadows across the tarmac. I believe we need to discuss your medical ethics. The color drained from the man's face. He whispered, "This is impossible." "It was supposed to be," Traoré said, his voice sharp with ice. "The readings, the symptoms, they were designed to catch you. And they worked." The arrest was quiet, surgical. A black van took Dr. Khan away. The following hours were a blur of interrogations, decryptions, and cascading revelations. With promises of immunity and safe passage for his family, Dr. Khan began to talk. And what he described sent ripples across continents. Operation Hippocratic Oath, 15 medical operatives, all MSAD trained, all inserted into countries across Africa under the guise of respected physicians. Each had a singular mission: to get close to national leaders, gain their trust and kill them. Slowly, subtly, plausibly. They used cardiotoxins that mimicked aging, neurological agents that simulated dementia, stroke-inducing compounds deployed under stress. Deaths would appear natural. Governments would destabilize. Favorable actors would rise. Dr. Khan's data was immediately verified. Names, methods, temptables. Within 72 hours, coordinated arrests swept across Mali, Ghana, Niger, and Chad. Some operatives fled, others were captured. Some were merely weeks away from executing their own final phases. The conspiracy shattered public trust in ways that would take years to repair. But the implications weren't over. At an emergency midnight meeting, Traoré listened as his intelligence chief, Colonel Sawado, detailed the full scope. His shirt clung to his back with sweat despite the frigid air conditioning. "Mossad, President," he said, trembling, "we've identified active operations in at least 11 countries. Each target is scheduled for elimination within the next 6 months." Traoré stared at the map displayed on the table. Dots marked potential victims, leaders of Côte d'Ivoire, Central African Republic, Nigeria, Cameroon, Senegal, each one oblivious to the silent death creeping toward them under the care of a smiling doctor. He could vanish now, disappear with his family, start again, safe and quiet. Or he could fight. He turned to the others in the room. "No more shadows," he said. "We warn every head of state. We expose the network. Let the world see what's been done." Silence, then nods. Africa was no longer a chessboard, it was a battlefield, and the war would be fought in clinics, boardrooms, embassies, and operating rooms. Against the urgent warnings of his Security Council, President Traoré made the single most dangerous decision of his presidency. It wasn't one he made lightly. The ramifications were immense, the risks nearly incalculable, but the stakes in his mind justified every ounce of danger. Within hours of his decision, Traoré personally initiated secure military communications with each of the 12 targeted leaders. Using encrypted channels previously reserved for nuclear-level emergencies, he reached out not as a fellow head of state, but as a desperate man trying to save lives. His words were measured, calm, but beneath the composed tone lived a storm. "Mr. President," Traoré began during his confidential call with Niger's leader, "I need you to immediately isolate your personal physician and have your blood tested for synthetic cardiotoxins. Your life depends on it." The responses came quickly, and they were terrifying. Every single leader tested positive for the same or similar compounds. The revelation struck like lightning. Operation Hippocratic Oath had not merely targeted Traoré. It had been orchestrating a synchronized assassination campaign spanning 12 nations. The goal was clear now: simultaneous medical assassinations to induce political chaos and destabilization across the continent. These weren't isolated attacks, they were chapters in a coordinated script. Then came the unexpected pivot. Dr. Conrad Messel, Decker Khan, facing life imprisonment and the slow erosion of his name, offered a bargain. The document came in through encrypted channels and landed on Traoré's desk just before midnight. His hands trembled as he read it. Complete intelligence on the entire network in exchange for full immunity and relocation. He hesitated. A deal with the devil, perhaps. But in war, even devils have their uses. Traoré approved the deal. During a secure video conference from his detention facility, Dr. Khan explained in halting, subdued tones. His old arrogance had evaporated. What he revealed next chilled the room. The medical equipment, he said, his voice just above a whisper, wasn't just for monitoring. Each piece was modified with remote activation capabilities. Traoré sat up straighter. Remote activation for what? Khan looked down. Emergency overdose protocols. If any operative was compromised, Tel Aviv could trigger massive toxin releases through the devices. All 12 presidents could be killed within minutes. The silence that followed was suffocating. What they were up against wasn't just an assassination plot. It was a remote, controlled execution system waiting for a single command. Traoré knew then that intelligence alone wouldn't be enough. Brute action would invite catastrophe. One wrong move, one detected countermeasure, and a dozen lives would be snuffed out before help could arrive. He needed strategy, he needed precision, and so began the most intricate counterintelligence operation in African history. For 2 weeks, all 12 targeted presidents maintained the illusion that nothing had changed. They appeared in public, held meetings, and even attended medical appointments with their designated physicians. All the while, a silent ballot was being performed behind the scenes. Military medics, trained in subterfuge, infiltrated the medical supply chains. One by one, they replaced the modified equipment with identical dummy units. It was an operation that required almost supernatural coordination. The swaps had to happen during actual appointments. The leaders had to feign illness, exhibit the symptoms of ongoing poisoning, while simultaneously receiving antidotes through concealed protocols. Trust was everything. If even one leader broke the script, the entire continent could burn. The culmination came on March 15th, at exactly 300 p.m. West Africa time. In 12 different nations, security teams moved in. Doctors were arrested mid-consultation. Clinics were raided. Devices were seized. The intelligence community erupted. The precision was unheard of. A continent had struck back not with vengeance, but with strategic mastery. The captured operatives provided more than confessions. They opened doors to encrypted data, hidden caches, and logistics systems built over a decade. What emerged was more horrifying than anyone had imagined. Operation Hippocratic Oath was only the first phase. The second phase was dubbed Continental Reset. Once the targeted leaders were dead, Israeli-backed interim governments were to be installed. These regimes would quickly sign military cooperation agreements, grant mining rights to private consortia, and create economic dependency channels. Africa's vast natural wealth, cobalt, lithium, rare earth minerals, was to be consolidated under foreign control, managed from Tel Aviv. The goal was no longer just political dominance. It was economic colonization through puppeteering. They weren't just planning to kill us. Traoré thundered during an emergency session of the African Union in Addis Ababa. His voice, projected through a dozen feeds and across packed conference halls, crackled with fury. They were planning to own us. What followed was nothing short of revolutionary. Within 30 days, the African Union ratified the Medical Security Protocol. It was sweeping in scope. All foreign medical personnel would henceforth be required to pass security vetting through a centralized Pan-African database. All imported medical equipment required triple verification from independent labs based in Senegal, Kenya, and South Africa. Even more transformative was the Continental Intelligence Sharing Accord, signed by 47 nations. Real-time threat alerts, joint counterspionage teams, and shared biometric systems created the most sophisticated internal security web the continent had ever seen. Operation Hippocratic Oath was officially over, but its lessons would ripple for generations. The 15 captured operatives were distributed across high-security prisons in different African nations. Their interrogations, monitored and verified, led to the unraveling of similar assassination networks in Southeast Asia and Latin America. Dr. Khan's cooperation, though reviled by many, resulted in the prevention of 17 additional attempts on heads of state worldwide. In the end, President Traoré's gamble had paid off. He didn't just foil a network. He awakened a continent. His message to the world was unmistakable. Underestimating African intelligence is the most dangerous mistake any adversary can make. And now, they all knew it.